thank you for joining us, Rochelle. So for listeners that are tuning in, just an introduction. Rochelle comes from the EdTech background, and she's not only in this space. She's been named as 150 women thought leaders to follow for 2022. And she's also one of the 30 K-12 IT influencers for 2021. And she's done a lot in the AI, AR, VR, STEM, expertise that she has. She also is a host, a podcaster for Thrive and EDU and PBL podcast for Define Learning on the BAM radio network. So overall, she's an educational technology dynamo, and we're thrilled to have her here in our podcast. And I guess over to you, Rochelle. Could you kind of explain how you got into the EdTech space and when was it that you decided?
Yeah, well, first of all, thanks for having me. It's funny that we're chatting, and Dr. Harvey joining from the future, I will say, because he's living in the future. For him, it's actually Wednesday joining in. So I have always loved technology, just ever since I was a kid, and just all of the things. I remember the first time I worked on a computer, and at school I learned to do some coding, and I just all I wanted to do was go home and code. That was it. My parents got a computer. I wanted to spend time on the computer all the time. And then, flash forward all these years later, I had never gotten my master's degree. I had my bachelor's degree, and then I was teaching for a couple of years. And then I ended up deciding to go to law school while teaching. And after that, years passed, and I was kind of interested in technology. And I just happened to find a program for getting a master's degree in EdTech. But prior to that, I had been using more in my language classes because I, for so many years, was teaching the way I had been taught, which there was nothing wrong with that because we didn't have all the tech back then and all the choices that are available for students. And I just tried to mix things up a little bit and give students a chance to kind of explore learning languages in different ways at their own pace, to have some fun with it, and for me to be able to kind of interact with them. And so that led me into the master's program, which it's like a long winding tale ever since that. But I love talking about education, love talking about anything EdTech. And just learning from students. But had it not been for them kind of pushing me a little bit too, and the law school experience, I don't really know where I would be today. So.
Yeah, that's interesting because classrooms used to be a lot more different back in the days. Actually, even now they're the same. If you looked at some of the Facebook posts and stuff, the comparison.
Right.
But I think as a whole, the learning experience that kids have these days has evolved tremendously, and technology has definitely been a disruptor in that space. But speaking to your experience in education and some of the other things that you've done in that space, do you have any specific examples of how technology has impacted positively student learning from your own classroom or features? Because I've seen some of your interviews and I've seen some of the books that you published. There's a lot that you've already shared. Some specific ones that you feel have been, just instrumental for you paving down this path.
Yeah, the first thing, there's all these things going through my mind right now, all the ways I could answer that question. But the thing that rises to the top is really what connected me more with what I'm doing now. And that's my students, because I remember it's been probably a good 7 or 8 years now, because these specific students that I'm referring to, some of them contributed to some of my books. They're all graduated, they're they're working on advanced degrees. But I remember in the state of Pennsylvania, we had a student showcase for technology, and I had presented at a local language teachers conference. I did a session there, but I had never thought about presenting at a large conference because I would always say that I didn't like speaking in public. And so I remember at a professional development session at school, there were these 2 7th graders that did a presentation to a room full of teachers. And I remember sitting in the back of the room thinking, I would not want to do that. And that was the first time I realized why students were kind of hesitant to do presentations in class. I didn't get it. So that made me think, okay, I need to get them involved in speaking more in myself as well. But instead of putting myself kind of out there, I decided to submit to have them do a presentation at a student technology showcase at our state conference that we have in Hershey, Pennsylvania. And it was accepted. And they were like, well, what are you doing? And I said, well, I'm going to be there to cheer you on. What do you mean? But I had actually put in a proposal. And I said, but I didn't think about it. They said, well, you're asking us to do it. Why aren't you going to do it? And I said, well, because I see the impact of this technology. I had, there's so many stories. We could talk for hours about this, but just one of them, I had a student, he became the Kahoot kid. And I remember it was 2014 when Kahoot first came out. And I was like having palpitations because the kids were so intense playing it for the first time that they loved it. And they loved the practice they were getting from it. That the next day, the one teacher came and said, hey, I just found out about this game Kahoot. I said, oh, it's great. One of my students went and made a game of Kahoot for his history class. And then other students were like really connecting with some of the different tools and why they liked them and how it was benefiting them. And so when it came time for that conference, they did the showcase first. And I was standing there on the side, nervous, thinking about my first presentation where, of course, all technology failed for me. Like whatever could go wrong went wrong on that day. But they were in the back of the room and they were like cheering me on, holding up the hearts and just really positive. And I just saw what an impact, like when we work with them, the technology, how it bonded them together, how it enhanced their learning, how they were able to choose something and share and become more confident because of what they were doing and creating with it. And not just in our classroom, but outside of our classroom. I mean, to go and eventually, when they were seniors, I remember each year when I put a proposal in, I had them with me. So I might start to talk about whatever the tool is. And I would say, oh, and here is Selene. I'll throw Selene's name out there, who's going to tell you more about it. And the students would say why they liked it, what the impact was, and share some of their work. That finally, when they were seniors, I said, my name is Rachelle Poth. These are my students. And I went to the side. They did the whole session. And their last year, it was a room of like probably 250 administrators, all roles of education, classroom teachers, tech coaches, everybody. And it wasn't about me, it was about them. But together we grew over that span of time, and it came through the tech, and that's what started it. So when I think about the impact, I see from all of those students which tools made a difference for them and how it helped them to like build their confidence and they got excited about it, or to be creative, or to, of course, learn the language because that's my primary goal. But it helped them to develop so many other skills, and for myself as well. So I don't know, that was like a long answer that I thought I could summarize, but that really was a game changer for me. And I know that it was for them as well. And, had I not taken that chance and had that realization and given them more of an opportunity to pick, like, hey, pick whatever you want to make it with, it doesn't matter. Just, I'm learning from you as well. So I think there's a lot of great opportunities for students to have choice. And we don't have to know everything about all the tools, because goodness, that is not possible these days, especially with all the emerging tech, but it's fun to learn from them.
Yeah, I think, of course, you definitely have to have that sort of mutual experience with kids these days, because, most of the information that they get now is through TikTok. And I think, our generation is just, it's very resistant to that kind of information and the dopamine hits that you would get with like 10-second sessions or reels or things like that, where, you have to be engrossed in a book for like days on end to finally get the information. Now it's like bite-sized. Mm-hmm. So it's just that, people that are growing up in these younger generations, they just process information differently than us. Their brains have been wired differently. So you definitely have to sort of think outside the box and let the teaching be more, like you said, inclusive. Mm-hmm. And also sort of give the ownership to the students to kind of come up with their own solutions and come up with their own, and sometimes kind of put them under pressure as well, like you did with that example. But so let's kind of stay on that particular topic. So we had a few experiences in the last couple of months where we spoke to a few universities. The best ones that are here. And one of the concerning points that was raised by teachers there was and this was like a few months back when ChatGPT just came out, right? So, one of the main questions that we would get was like, how do we block this, right? Like, how do you sort of get the assessment of plagiarism from ChatGPT, or like, understand like how do we, make sure the assignments are not being filled out by ChatGPT. Obviously, like, I'm sure that's something that you would want to discuss as well, but what are some of the emerging tech that you can see on the horizon that will impact education by a lot from your own experience?
Yeah, well, the ChatGPT is that, a year basically now, but I think it was in 2020, probably maybe April or May, is when I did some research and helped to kind of like co-write this article about GPT. And I didn't know what it was at that point. And when I started to research it, I'm like, this is unbelievable what this is capable of. And I was already doing some work in AI. But then last year, this time, writing an article about ChatGPT and GPT-3, it was like, oh boy. And then everybody was coming to me. I was getting messages like, should we ban it? And that's the end of teaching and all of these things, like, we're done. And I'm like, you can't ban it, because think about, like, if students wanted to get answers from somebody, have somebody else do their work, that could have been done. That has been done pre-technology, pre-Google, pre-everything. You could ask somebody, you can pay somebody to write the essay. And I had a lot of people reaching out to me to ask me that question, like, what do we do? And I said, well, first of all, you have to really think about what it is that you're asking students to do. And it goes back to, when Google, right? Everybody's like, if they can Google the answer, you're not asking the right questions. Like, it's that simple. But we're in schools and we're in the best place, in the perfect place to help students to develop skills and to understand it. And it's just another tool. You got ChatGPT, you got Bard, I can keep the list going. Perplexity is another one that I've been testing out. If you go to there's an AI for that. There's like 9,700 different AI tools that are out there. So I don't think, and it's been exciting for the last almost 6 years that I've been doing presentations on it, because for the first couple, it's like, this might just be a fad. It might just disappear. I'm like, I don't think it's, AI has kind of been around since like the 1950s. So I don't really see that it's going to disappear, but it's going to definitely impact these tools like, the generative AI. It's just another change. When we got computers, we've had to change our teaching practices along the way. And it doesn't just impact people in education. It's any area of work. Think about people that are like, I'm a blogger and I have this great job. It's like, you know what? I can get ChatGPT to write that blog. I don't need you anymore. So you don't want that to happen when it comes to these different tools like ChatGPT and the AI. AI, there are definitely obviously benefits to it, but there's a lot of negatives you have to look at, like the ethical concerns that come up, the bias, all of that, which we definitely don't have time to go into. But as long as people are aware of that, which, I know they are, and the plagiarism and the academic integrity. But the thing that people are doing and embracing is like using it as a teaching tool, assuming that you can access it in school and learning about it. Because I can say probably in the last maybe 6 months, whenever I've done a session specifically on AI, I always have a survey and I ask people, have you used ChatGPT? And in most cases, like 70% of the people that have been in attendance at my session, wherever it has been, have not yet tried it. And I'm like, okay, open up a tab on your computer right now and go test it out, because you have to understand what the capabilities are, and then help students understand, like, okay, you can use it. And I had a question come up a couple of weeks ago from one of my colleagues that said, well, what do I do if I assign an essay, and students just turn in something that's written by ChatGPT? How do I avoid that? And I said, well, it's how you set up your assignment. Because if you say you need 5 different resources and one has to be this, you name them, and one of them can be ChatGPT, and then you teach them how to properly APA, MLA cite it, then that's different, because they're taking the information, but they also have to know how to fact check it. So, we're looking like AI, and then things like blockchain and NFTs, and how that, in the metaverse. People like, it's coming and going. Like a couple of years ago, everybody's talking about the metaverse, and you didn't hear so much because then ChatGPT and AI is, at the forefront. But now metaverse, there's a couple of weeks ago, I was at a ribbon cutting ceremony for the metaverse where there was the professor and the digital twin was cutting the ribbon. So it's really like mind blowing to think, especially for people like myself who started teaching in the 1900s, like how much technology.
Later.
I know. it has advanced so much. And so the short answer to my very long answer there, because you can tell, very excited to talk about these things, is we just have to embrace the changes, because we have to prepare the students for whatever's coming ahead. We don't know what the jobs are going to be. And we might not think that we need to know a thing about blockchain or NFTs, but we just might have to be using that for student data and storing information or giving credentials. And so being aware of it, we're not going to be the expert, but it might very well be something that is in our workflow on a daily basis. And so we just learn with them is the best advice I can give.
Yeah, and I think in general as well, the classroom of the future, I feel like it's going to be very different. There's COVID taught us what happens when you're not prepared for like a virtual environment, and we had Zoom meetings and things were crashing all the time, and like schools were shut down and parents were complaining every day about it. So like I feel like, and then from an opportunity perspective as well, there's a lot that can be taken by opening up the classrooms towards, like right now, if there are a lot of universities that are already offering online programs, but they're always seen as less than, right? Like, University of Oxford offers an online program, but unless and until you actually go to the campus, you're not seen as a University of Oxford graduate or Cambridge graduate. So, but like, why, right? Like, if you could have a thing like COVID come in and just like disrupt the whole environment for a year, and then you're completely fine by having online sessions,
right?
Why not extend that? Why not just do it for the sake of increasing revenue for you? Like, why have people come in and live in hostels or like nearby and relocate just to be part of the community? Like, right. There's, and that kind of leads me to the next question that I had. It's actually two-sided. One is from this perspective, from a cost perspective, as well as looking at how technology, from a revenue generation standpoint, can be utilized in just, the short-term gains that it can offer, right? Like, let's not look at the long-term gains or, what could potentially happen if we had chips implanted in our brains. Let's leave that for later, for Elon. But for now, let's look at the short-term gains that technology can offer from a perspective of, obviously generating more revenue, but also reducing the cost of, education as a whole to students using tech, right? And then secondly, how can we go even further back? Like, I'm talking about, like kids that are in my head, the whole idea of the digital divide that is coming up and the equitable access to technology, right? Mm-hmm. So you have kids that are growing up with tablets at the age of like 3 or 4, being entrepreneurs at the age of 13 or 14, or TikTok influencers and stuff, and kids that don't have a computer until they're like 15 or something, right? Like, they're just so far behind now. Like, I feel like because of tech, it's just become like super hyper inflated in terms of the success that you can have or the failure that you can be.
Right.
So talk through about what institutes are doing about bridging that. So I'm sorry, 2 questions in the same way, but yeah.
That's okay. The one thing that you mentioned too, and I'm thinking back to the metaverse, but the hybrid and when students are learning online, like, thankfully we had the technology, because everything would have stopped, right? Not just school, but work and everything. And it wasn't the best thing ever, because you couldn't be together. And it's really important to be able to like spend time in person with people and build those relationships and interpersonal skills. And there's a big difference when you're sitting in a Zoom meeting. But when you're in the metaverse, if anybody has been in, there was a conference held in the metaverse last year, and that also was mind blowing, because you're represented by an avatar in that space, and you can be joining in just like people are joining in here from around the world in the future. Like, I like it. We have a couple of them from the future right now, but it's that accessibility issue. And so funding and the cost of going to a certain university, or maybe you want to major in something that is not offered locally, so it's cost prohibitive. Having that ability, or I guess that availability is the word. Availability and ability, where a student wants to enroll in a university. I was going to say in a university that offers, the online program, but that's, you feel disconnected too, because I know, you talk about like social presence in online environments, and if you don't really feel like if you have a course that's asynchronous, you're not seeing somebody face to face, you don't hear other people's voices or see their faces, you don't feel like you're really part of the school. And so I get that. The one thing that you mentioned about like you're not seen as the same as if you're on campus versus like off campus. But did you complete the same requirements? Did you do the same tasks? Like, did you get the grades? Did you pay it? Like all of that being the same, then you should be seen as equal. But for some people, like you can't get there because the cost is so expensive. And sometimes these online opportunities are, more accessible, and it allows people who are maybe, older learners like myself deciding to go to law school. I mean, I did have to go in person, so they were long days teaching, until 3 and then going to school 4 nights a week. But master's programs, like advanced degrees that people want, they may need to work, they might have families, and having that availability for older learners or younger learners, depending on what their responsibilities are, is huge. Now, luckily, as a result of COVID and school closures, that really opened up people's eyes to how many students and families were without Wi-Fi, internet, let alone having devices. And so people really were more intentional about checking in on that fact to make sure that the families had access and students had access. I remember reading a story about a superintendent, I think in California, who in a couple of the neighborhoods, they set up a school bus that it was Wi-Fi, and the kids could go sit on the bus and do work, or they could sit outside of the bus and they had the connection where otherwise they wouldn't. So that was pretty awesome. But the online and all the different technology, the different ways we can collaborate and communicate, and learning that's not confined. I mean, being in the classroom space is great to be able to like walk up to somebody and to interact and to see faces, but also having the availability to learn and experience like this, where this is professional learning, right? You and I, totally different places, people joining in the conversation from around the world. And it's a learning experience that's free also for everybody that's joining in too. But when students have the chance, if they're even just curious about something, in taking one class, or maybe, in my case, in a doctoral program, not every course is offered when you need it. And so you want to complete that degree, but you don't want to wait another year to do it. So having different options where you can enroll in other universities online or metaversities, whatever it is really beneficial, provided everybody has access to a device and, the connectivity issue.
Metaversity, I think if it's not, then you should definitely go for it.
I did not make that up. That was
okay.
Yeah, that was an article from, I think, a year and a half ago. I guess last June, I think Stanford was the first, or one of the first, to actually officially launch a metaversity. And that was a term that I found in my research. And so then it was planned that there were going to be 10 to 12 more metaversities launched last fall. And so, the Ed3 DAO organization, Arthur Harvey, they were the ones that had the conference online. And if you and I were the avatars and walking past each other on the screen, you could turn the camera on in Zoom, or you could talk and you could hear the person right next to you because that spatial sound. Whereas in a Zoom meeting, you don't really feel like you're in that same space. So yeah, I recommend anybody tuning in, if you're curious, check out that organization and that summit from last year, or conference. It was unbelievable.
And what's interesting is that with Apple's new headgear coming out next year, I know Quest has been there forever, like with Facebook, but whatever Apple does seemingly becomes the norm, right? So, Google came up with this Google Glass earlier, but it did not work. Now, when Apple comes up with it and everybody becomes a user, it's going to be, I can't even imagine how the future is going to be like, where mixed reality becomes a part of everything around you, right? You could be, like you mentioned, in a coffee shop and then also be in a classroom, right, at the same time. And you're just there, like in front of, as an avatar, in front of your teacher and having this whole experience. You could be on a plane and be still like somehow connected if you have the connection there. But yeah, it's kind of interesting how things are going to be drastically changing. I think it's going to be tough, but I think it's needed. I think the only reason why it's tough right now, why teachers are sort of, being forced to learn. I mean, not every teacher is like you. So most of them are being forced to learn and kind of have to pivot. It's because it's been so, similar to what it was before, that now the change seems drastic. Now the enemies are right outside the gate and they're knocking, and they just have to open it, so you can't really do anything. But let's kind of go back to AI for a bit, and I think we had discussed we kind of not spoken about the equitable sort of component of accessibility to information with tech. Do you see institutes kind of making strides towards that in terms of adoption of technology, not just like from a software perspective, but a hardware standpoint as well? Like, how do you see schools, like primary schools even, looking at education as, and how early do you think they should be kind of embracing it and sort of making sure that the kids that are going to be growing up have the tools that are necessary to be successful in this day and age?
Yeah, well, I think that's definitely not something elementary teachers probably thought of prior to March of 2020. But the reality is, if you go out in the public and you see, I mean, the youngest kids have devices. I mean, it's a tablet, it's an iPad. There's some 9-year-olds that already have iPhones. I don't even have an iPhone. So they're growing up in a digital world. And I've said this to my students before too. It's like your whole life is captured in this digital space. I mean, from the time you were born, in most cases, parents and families have social media accounts. Their pictures are on Facebook and they're all over the place. But I think because they're surrounded by technology so much, they have to understand it. And there's, with the ChatGPT too, there's a big concern about, like the older students using it for plagiarism, but there's also the concern for the younger students, because the younger students, if they just automatically, I mean, they catch on so quick. They start typing something, oh, I can have ChatGPT do all of my homework for me for all of these classes. And you don't want that to happen, because they have to build all of those skills that they need. And you also don't want to have an over-reliance on technology. And so I think that the best thing, for teachers to do, and I'm not an elementary teacher, but I know that when we went virtual, it was really difficult for them, because trying to figure out how to teach, because they were using some tech, but not every student had access to a device, and being able to connect with them is so different in the virtual world as opposed to being in class where you're with the same group for pretty much the whole day. So now, a lot of my friends that teach elementary, I've seen some of the work that they do. They've advocated and they've gotten grants and they've gotten devices. The kids have iPads. Some of them are cyber teachers, so they automatically have access. The students and the families have access to the internet and to the devices. But the kids need to learn the skills so that they can build and adapt over time, because as fast as technology is changing now, like the skills that they're learning now might be completely outdated like 2 years from now. I mean, I think about when I go back to when I was in 8th grade, and I'm not going to say when that was, but if I compare the span of time and I think about all of the changes that I've seen over my lifetime since that point, I can condense all of those changes to probably like the last 3 years to make it, an equivalent, analogy, I guess is the word I'm going for. Like, it seems like everything that happened was like, oh, this is awesome. We have all this tech. It took all of this time. But then now all of a sudden, you got mixed reality. You have the headsets. Your cell phone is like one thing. Whereas when I was in 8th grade, I needed like 30 different devices, some of which didn't even exist yet, to do the things that we have in our hands. And so the kids, whatever opportunities they can get, because they can collaborate, they can be creative, they can dive into STEM learning, they can do drawings. I mean, they can record their voices, they can do podcasts. There's a lot of different things they can do. And I think sprinkling in opportunities for them across all grade levels is important, because technology skills, tech is not going away. I don't think. It might not work all the time, but I don't see the tech is going away.
Right. Exactly. And I think you're right in the fact that, the way things are progressing, at the end of the day, it's like we have to look at our educational institutes to equip the kids these days to be, readily available to take on the challenges that they're going to face later on. So I think there's a lot that needs to be done there. Like I still remember for me, having gone through probably until my master's degree, or even actually having completed that, I learned nothing about entrepreneurship or sort of like what is in store for me when I take this path. So it's and that time things used to be much more simpler. Now it's like I mentioned, I've met a lot of entrepreneurs that are like not even 20, and they're worth $100 million or something. So it's like it's the opportunities that are available now. Okay, that's an interesting comment. It's just it's boundless, and I think the access to technology needs to start as early as possible. Obviously, there have to be guardrails, like you mentioned, with ChatGPT and some of the other tech that can be misused. But I think if we don't start learning as early as possible, we'll be left behind, and right. Teachers need to think of that when they're thinking of their students. So we spoke about ChatGPT earlier in terms of how teachers are thinking about in terms of the usage from a student perspective. But I'm interested to learn from a teacher's perspective, like using ChatGPT. I'm assuming a lot of lesson plans are being created right now in ChatGPT. But beyond that, what are some of the other aspects of using AI, and not just ChatGPT, but AI in general, like whether it's ML or AL. So how do you think that's being used right now from a teaching perspective to kind of help them?
Yeah, well, I think one thing that's kind of funny is there was, I forget the percentage, but there was a certain percentage of people that they did a survey, and they were like, they had no idea that what they were using had, AI, it was powered by AI. And it was the personalization part of it, where, there's learning platforms that are out there, game-based learning platforms that teachers are using, that the students, whatever the content is, there's that bank of questions. But as the students work through it, they get different questions, different order, and it can kind of track based on the algorithms, if they keep missing a certain thing. Like for me, if it's verb conjugations, for example, like I can do that as a teacher. I can walk around, I can have them do an activity in class, I can ask them questions, but it takes more time. But these game-based learning platforms and there's so many out there. And I tried a couple of years ago, one of them with my students. It was newer, and they all started on the same. They were a little bit irritated because they were in 8th grade and I was having the beta test some 5th grade math. And I said, well, it shouldn't be a problem. Like, it's just 5th grade math, you're in 8th grade. And they all started on the same problem. But based on how fast they answered, whether they got it right or wrong in the following questions, it basically charted a personalized learning path for them as they went. And so they got the practice they needed when they needed it. And at the end of that repetition that they got helped them to build those skills. And then it also identified for me in the dashboard to see I see these patterns and these trends. So we can do that with paper. We did it before technology existed, personalizing learning. It's not that that's something new, but using some of the different AI powered tools that are out there help us to do that faster. So then we save time that we can talk to the students one-on-one or a whole group, and we can have those, those opportunities where otherwise we might not. And when every day my students are like, can we use this? They name a bunch of different tools because, one, they are fun. Two, they get them excited about learning and practicing. And who doesn't like playing a game? But the third thing is that they can see how they've done, and they see their progress over time. And they see when they get a repeat question also in some of them based on those algorithms. And so teachers are using, and there's some really great tools out there. Some that I use, I use ChatGPT every day because I'm testing out if it's right, if it's wrong, what is it capable of? I have the GPT-4 that I've been using to generate some different things, and it makes mistakes. You have to check it, but the time that it saves, and some of the different platforms that are out there that have so many resources, that if you're a teacher that might have 5 different courses you're preparing for, or you're a new teacher and you're just, I remember the days, the overwhelm of, I have to create all of these different things and presentations, and there's not enough hours in the day. They can really help, and I like that. The ChatGPT, of course, and the other ones like it, super helpful. You can do a lot with that, alone. But some platforms that I use, I have to say, like from Pittsburgh, there's one that's EduAid, and they have, I think, over 100 resources, things like writing IEPs that are very time consuming. And again, you have to be careful not putting in, personally identifiable information like names and addresses and things, but being able to generate something that gives you some time back where you can work with students, you can work with your colleagues. I think that's when it makes the difference. And you're seeing how it works, and you can use it for your benefit, but also kind of understand like how it functions and what the benefits are that you can then share with students as well.
So, I also know that you're an EdTech consultant and advise a lot of companies in their boards on their solutions and stuff. So when clients come to you or institutes come to you to kind of evaluate, selecting the right solution for themselves, what are some of the best practices that they should follow in, actually defining what the right solution looks like for the specific goal or, needs that they have for their students in terms of learning?
Yeah, for me, when I started to use EdTech, the word that really pushed me down that path was disconnect. Because in my classroom, what I noticed was that my students were they were absent, and I think I wrote about this at one point. I'd be teaching, and then I felt somebody like standing next to me, and I'm like, okay. And they said, I was absent yesterday, what did I miss? I'm like, let me stop teaching this room of like 30 students right now and answer you, which I wanted to help them, but like that wasn't the best time. Or they would come to see me after school and I was in a meeting or I wasn't there, or it was, whatever happened. And so that was the first point for me. It was like the disconnect. So I found some solutions like, Edmodo. Back when I found Edmodo, I wasn't going to use Blackboard at the time. I wanted something simple. And then I just started to add things to it. So my first thing that I recommend, from an educator perspective, is think about your classroom or whatever your role is and what is taking like a lot of your time, or what is a task that you have that you just think like, oh goodness, I have to do this. And it takes a lot of time, or I don't have any fresh ideas, or something that's really like weighing down and you feel a little bit overwhelmed. Okay, then is there something that can help you with that? So like, let's say you have to generate lesson plans, or you're teaching the topic that you've taught so many times and you just cannot think of anything creative. What do you need to do? Well, you find a tool that's going to spark some interest and be creative with it. Also, I don't know if you want to talk about like funding and those types of things too, but I always think of the why. Why do you need something? What is it going to do? How's it going to benefit you? But more importantly, how's it going to benefit the students? And does it offer more than just like one thing? Like if it's only one thing, then like what's the point? But if it has a lot of different resources, tools, if it's easy to navigate, like those are things, because there is no shortage of tools. And I saw a survey yesterday that and I think the percentage was like around 58% of those teachers that they surveyed said that there were way too many tools out there, which, it was great, but the problem is they didn't know where to start with one. Like, how do you know where to begin? And I always think, just what is something that is really not your favorite activity, very time consuming, and find a solution to that problem first.
Right. So more like process engineering, right? Like look at redundancies, look at things that can be streamlined using automation. Right. And it's funny that you like the service that you mentioned. Like I feel like most of the people in the educational system would probably still understand only, like I'm not talking about teachers, but I'm talking about like administrators in those jobs that are looking to redefine the process for their educational institute. They're probably just still familiar with LMSs, and that's the extent of their knowledge. In terms of deploying things, it's left to the teachers to actually incorporate things or push out ways through which they can, scale the learning of their students. Like, and people like yourself are make it their, sort of objective in life to kind of bring change. So I think there's a lot that needs to be done by these administrators to kind of look at what their current structure is, and is it really helping the teachers, or is it just following what is old and you just stamp this, component of LMS or like barcode scanners or QR code scanners or things like that, or attendance management and stuff. And those are like very dated. I think the way you kind of described it, something that is platform agnostic, something that can connect with multiple applications, multiple solutions, that can come in and allow a plug and play sort of an environment. So later on, maybe, a student comes up and they have a different requirement, you can actually see how that platform can scale by adding that particular layer. So another question that you kind of, you touched upon it, but, it's very interesting for me, as a ex-student from before, and how I see classrooms sort of evolving. How do you sort of balance, technology and the sort of traditional teaching methods? Or is there even a balance? Like we've discussed, mixed reality and stuff, and obviously like that would be on the other edge. I think that also kind of strikes a balance, but I mean, are there other ideas or things that you've discussed or thought of or seen around you that you feel like could be a better balance between the classroom of tomorrow, taking some components of the classroom of yesterday?
Yeah, the word balance, like, I don't know that is something that can ever be achieved in anything, because like there's just always so many things. And that actually reminded me of earlier, everybody was teaching before schools closed. Everybody had their whole system. Like for me, I did a bunch of different activities during the 42 minutes, felt pretty good about it. And then all of a sudden we're online. I'm like, I almost feel like I don't know how to teach, because you're pushed into this online environment. Even though I was using technology, everybody was asking, like a lot of tech coaches too, like everybody's going to them like, well, how do I teach online? It's like nobody really had that experience. So you can know all about the tech, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you know how to leverage it perfectly to keep learning going. So that was a whole learning experience. And then people figured out like, oh, well, I didn't need to use like these worksheets or these books or all these materials, because in some cases, like for myself, I didn't actually have them, or my students, all the students, and I think most schools around the world were probably told, take all your books home. But I don't know the percentage of the students that actually did that, because in my case, I had a lot that didn't, which not a problem. I can scan it and share it online. But so teachers learned a new way of teaching when they were online. Then they were put back into the classroom. And when I went back in the classroom, I'm like, wait, how do I do this again? And it was very conflicting, because I got rid of older methods, because I'm like, oh, I don't really need to do this way, because I can use this digital tool. But then I'm back in the classroom and I'm like, well, what do I do? And then the overwhelm came, because people found new methods and new digital tools, and they just added everything in. Then they're back in that space. So I think the perfect balance, it's going to be different for everybody. There's not a perfect equation where you're like 50% tech, 50% no tech. I think it honestly depends on the day, on you, on the students, on the content, and not specifically in that order. That's just off the cuff, because you might have a plan set in mind and the students come in and whatever is happening, every day is unpredictable. Or they come in, the first thing they say is like, today, like, are we playing a game today? I'm like, actually, today's the day we were not going to play a game, because I was going to teach you how to conjugate verbs. And they're like, with a game, I'm like, what is it with these games? And, the benefit, and there was a question before, like, how do you know the impact? I think you measure the impact because you compare, for me, prior years of teaching, narrating in the past tense, like students have struggled with it in Spanish and also in French. But a couple of years ago, I got pushed by students. They said, why don't we get to do the cool augmented virtual reality stuff? And I was like, I had nothing to say. So I did it. And when I did that, like, those kids remembered that, even the kids that didn't take Spanish the following year, because of the way that they learned and the collaboration. And so for me, I saw that benefit, because the way I had been doing it versus that was a huge difference. I think also it's important asking the students for feedback too. Like, what do you, and they're pretty honest. Most of the time, I say most of the time, because if they have a choice between like a worksheet or writing something in a game, the game is going to win out every time. But I guess it depends on your goals. Do you want to get like a quick pulse check for where students are? Then use the technology, because that's fast. Do you want to give them some practice that they get what they need? Then you use one of the tools powered by AI because it can adapt based on the algorithms and what it's getting from them in that 5 minutes, and it can give them what they need. And then you can take that information and you can do activities that don't require the technology. You can have conversations. You can have the kids working together. I really think, in my case and others, it's obviously different too, but I find that often the topic that I'm planning on teaching for the day sometimes drives the way I go about doing it. And even today, I used something and I was ready to hand it out to them, and I realized there was a mistake. I was like, wait, take 3 minutes to just chat with your neighbor about this. I have to fix something, because it was just like an activity where they were going to be talking, but I made a mistake on it, and it was just kind of fun. So I think what you have to do is just dive in, try new methods, and not do all the same thing, because change is good and stretching your boundaries is good as well. I dove into station rotations without having a clue of what I was supposed to do. I just moved the desks. Kids were like, what do we do? And I'm like, didn't get that far. All I knew is I moved the furniture because I was tired of the rows. So you just have to take some chances with, new ideas and see. And there are teachers that I've worked with who say, I've never used technology other than my LMS. I don't need to use anything. And, situations came up where, you're out of the classroom, you have students that are learning from home, and you need solutions. And so, not name dropping any tools, but, there's tools that you have that have the interactive lessons that kids can do at their own pace. So then that's great. Or if you do run a lesson in class and you want to have it saved so a kid can go back to it, then a tech tool is perfect for that. So there's no shortage of options out there. It's just focusing on the why and then the how and which am I going to use for this? I don't know. I'm not the expert. I think I didn't say that yet, but I say that a lot. I'm not the expert. There are so many things you could ask me about and be like, yep, I was wrong about student engagement, and the list goes on and on. But I'm learning as I go, and enjoying, every single moment, laughing when I make mistakes and owning them as well. But I don't know. It's fun. Tech is fun. Learning is fun.
It is. Yeah. It kind of ageless in the sense that, you could tomorrow something comes out and it just brings me back to the point where, I was a kid and I was just inspired or just excited about this new tech. It kind of gets you going. And I can't even imagine what old age must have been like when you had factories and stuff. You could get excited about what new products were being released. Now it's products are being released every day or every minute. So it's a lot more faster. It's also tedious. It kind of strains you a little bit, but it also keeps you kind of young and interested and excited about stuff. So on that same note, and I know we're going to be concluding the podcast now before we keep talking for another 2 hours, because it's an interesting topic and you're an interesting guest. So, but just to kind of make sure that we round this up. In terms of educational professionals that are looking to explore this education tech space a little bit more, what are some of the resources and professional development opportunities that you can suggest for them and you can look to, aside from obviously following you? And you should definitely mention where they can get in touch with you as well for more information, and sort of look towards what you can guide them on, aside from the 8 books that you've already written. Please.
Oh goodness. Well, funny you say about where they can reach me, because I never wanted to have any social media accounts. And I think I wrote a series of 7 blogs about how I was wrong about Facebook and LinkedIn and all these spaces. So, PD is so different now, and learning, there's opportunities everywhere. You go for a walk, you listen to a podcast, people joining in now, you read a blog. But I would say if you really want to get connected, I joined ISTE, and if anybody's not familiar, it's the International Society for Technology and Education. As part of my master's, we had to select an organization, and I looked at ISTE and I'm like, oh, this sounds great. And they offer so much. They have conferences and webinars, and if you want books on AI, you name it, they have it. They also have a discussion community, so I think that's great. LinkedIn is a fantastic space as well. I was wrong about that because I thought it was just for people looking for jobs. I didn't realize it was just for connecting, and there are all these communities. And so I do learn a lot there. Twitter or X, depending on how you look at or what you refer to it as, and Facebook. But even just reading, I do write a lot of blogs I've written for Getting Smart for many years, and that's why I really got started with AI, just because it pushed me to explore a topic that I wasn't familiar with. And so even quick reading of blogs like on Getting Smart, Define Learning, Edutopia, ISTE I mentioned, there's all kinds of conferences. I think any chance that you can get, whether in person or virtual, to engage and interact with people, that's going to be super beneficial, because being an educator can be really isolating at times because you're so busy. And like, how do you connect with other people when you're like staying in your classroom and you're getting things ready for the next class? But having those spaces, the virtual spaces, really helps you to feel less alone, and you can connect and get ideas, have colleagues from around the world joining in whenever you're chatting on a podcast. So, but anybody, they can connect with me on Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, my website, it's my blog. I have guest blogs on there. If people would like for me to talk with them, do some coaching, I do that as well. So always happy to help others.
That's amazing. I think as a mentor, you'd be a great fit. So for people that are who are part of this podcast and want to learn more, obviously we'll leave links for Rachelle at the bottom so you can follow her in different places. And do get a copy of her book. It was definitely an interesting read. And we're going to be having a workshop as well, Integrated Technology in Modern Classrooms, on December the 5th, between 6 and 8 Central in our Houston office. So please join us if you'd like to learn more. And thank you again, Rachelle, for being part of our conversation today and shedding light on this really important issue. And I think it was a very fun conversation for me, and I look forward to more conversations later on.
Yeah, well, thank you. It was definitely fun for me. I don't know that I answered all of your questions, but I sure can chat. I get excited about it because if it weren't for law school and if it weren't for the students that I spoke about before, like I know I wouldn't still be in the classroom, and it's exciting. And if I can help others, then that's what keeps me going. And I do manage to sleep, so. People always say, do you ever sleep? I do sleep. But thanks for the opportunity to talk. Yeah.
Exactly. We all try to sleep as much as possible with tech.